You have 30 seconds to tell me why I shouldn't walk out of this hospital room right now, and I saved your life is not a good enough reason. When Caleb Hargrove pulls a woman from a wrecked car on a dark highway, he expects a stranger. He gets Serena Voss, the woman his brother left without explanation 4 years ago. The wound his family never talked about. The name he still flinches at. Serena wants nothing from the Hargrove family, least of all from the one who never once reached out after everything fell apart. But the truth about why Marcus ended their engagement has been buried under a carefully constructed lie, and Caleb is about to find it in the last place he ever thought to look. Some rescues go both ways. The rain had been coming down for 40 minutes by the time Caleb Hargrove decided to stop counting it as background noise and start paying attention to the road. He had the kind of tiredness that settled behind the eyes and made the highway lines blur at the edges. Not dangerous yet, but close enough that he'd turned the radio up twice in the last half hour without it helping. The drive from Portland back to Millhaven was 3.5 hours on a good night. Tonight was not a good night. He saw the headlights first, 2 beams cutting sideways off the overpass ramp ahead of him, swinging the wrong direction, with that particular slow-motion certainty that meant the driver had already lost the fight with physics and didn't know it yet. Caleb had a fraction of a second to register what he was seeing before the silver sedan went through the guardrail with a sound like a gunshot and dropped 6 feet into the drainage ditch running alongside the access road below. He had his hazards on and his car half on the shoulder before he consciously decided to stop. Later, he would not be able to explain what happened in the next 4 minutes with any precision. He remembered the rain on his face, the cold of the ditch water when it hit his knees, the way the driver's side door had crumpled just enough to jam. He remembered breaking the passenger window with his elbow because it was faster. Remembered the smell of deployed airbags and something chemical underneath. Remembered getting his hands under the woman's arms and pulling with everything he had while the car settled deeper into the silt and the water climbed. He remembered getting her to the embankment. He did not remember deciding to do any of it. The woman was breathing. That was the first thing he checked, kneeling in the wet grass with his hands shaking in a way they hadn't been 30 seconds ago. She had a cut above her left temple, bleeding steadily, but not the kind of bleeding that meant arterial, and her left wrist was bent at an angle that made him look away and then look back because he needed to know how bad it was. Bad. Not catastrophic, but bad. He called 911 with water still dripping from his phone and kept his hand on her shoulder while he gave the dispatcher the mile marker, because she had started to shiver, and he thought that if he stayed in contact, she might stay conscious. She didn't stay conscious. She went under, somewhere between his third repetition of "stay with me" and the moment the paramedics' lights appeared at the top of the embankment. He didn't stop talking to her anyway. He had run out of practical things to say, so he told her the ambulance was 4 minutes away, then 3, then 1. And he wasn't sure if any of it reached her, but it gave him something to do with his voice besides go quiet. The paramedics were efficient and fast, and slightly baffled by the mud-soaked man standing at the edge of their workspace, who clearly wasn't going anywhere. One of them, a young woman with her hair in a tight braid, asked him twice if he was injured. He said no, both times. The second time she looked at him the way medical professionals look at people who are in shock and don't know it. And he said more carefully, "I'm not hurt. I need to know she's stable." "Are you family?" the paramedic asked. Caleb opened his mouth, closed it. "No," he said. "I'm the one who pulled her out." They let him ride to Millhaven General in the front of a second unit that had arrived as backup, on the grounds that his car was still half on the shoulder of the highway and someone needed to deal with it later. And also, he was clearly not going to drive himself anywhere in the next hour. He sat with his wet jacket in his lap and watched the lights of the highway pass and tried to make his hands stop shaking. He didn't know who she was yet. He found out the way you find out things in emergency rooms, incidentally sideways from information that wasn't meant for him. A nurse came out to the waiting area to ask the man who'd brought the patient in if he knew her name, her emergency contacts, anything. Caleb said he didn't know her, he'd just pulled her from the car. The nurse nodded and said they'd found her wallet. They had her name. They were trying to reach someone. The nurse said the name the way nurses say names quickly, practically as part of a longer sentence about next of kin. Serena Voss. Caleb heard it the way you hear something that doesn't make sense the first time and then makes too much sense the second time. And the two sensations happen so close together that there's no gap between them to breathe in. He said, "Can you say that again?" The nurse did. Serena Voss, 29 years old, Millhaven address on her license. Caleb sat back down in the plastic chair he'd just stood up from. He put his wet jacket on the empty seat beside him. He looked at the emergency room doors and thought with a clarity that felt almost chemical about the last time he had seen Serena Voss. 4 years ago at his parents' house in Millhaven at a Sunday dinner that had ended badly. Not dramatically badly, no raised voices, no broken things, just the quiet, suffocating badly of a family that had decided something without telling the person most affected, and was now waiting for her to figure it out and leave. Marcus had been tense the entire meal. Their mother had been perfectly gracious in the way she was gracious when she needed people to believe nothing was wrong. Caleb had been 29 and oblivious, and had spent most of the dinner talking to his father about a bridge project in Rotterdam. He hadn't known that night that it was the last time Serena would sit at that table. He found out a week later from Marcus in a conversation so short it barely qualified as a conversation. "Serena and I are done." What happened? It wasn't working. End of conversation. End of subject. Their mother had never brought it up again, which should have struck Caleb as strange, but he'd been deep in a project deadline and had told himself that sometimes relationships ended, and it wasn't his business. Now he was sitting in a hospital waiting room covered in drainage ditch water, and Serena Voss was behind those doors with a broken wrist and a head wound, and the distance between the two facts felt both enormous and like no distance at all. He should leave. There was genuinely no reason for him to stay. She didn't know he was here. She had no one listed as an emergency contact. The nurse had mentioned that too in passing as a logistical problem rather than a human one, which meant no one was coming, which meant she would wake up alone, which meant nothing, because she didn't know him, not really, and he had no claim on the situation. He stayed. He stayed for the same reason he'd broken the car window instead of waiting for the door to give way, because leaving felt wrong in a way he couldn't articulate and didn't need to. He bought bad coffee from the vending machine at the end of the hall. He texted his business partner that he'd be late getting back. He did not text anyone in his family. He sat in the plastic chair and waited, and tried not to think too hard about why. At 11:47, a nurse he hadn't seen before came out and said the patient in Bay 4 was asking for whoever had brought her in. Caleb set down the coffee cup. He ran one hand over his face, which was still damp. He followed the nurse through the double doors. Serena was propped up on the hospital bed at a slight angle, her left arm in a temporary splint, a line of butterfly bandages along her temple. She was pale the way people are pale when they've lost blood. Not sickly, just drained of the extra color the body usually carries. Her dark hair was wet at the ends, still, and she had the particular alert quality of someone who had woken up in an unfamiliar place and immediately started taking inventory of their surroundings. She was doing that when he came in, scanning the room with careful brown eyes, and then the scanning stopped. The expression that crossed her face was not one Caleb had been prepared for. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't gratitude. It was something closer to a person finding an unexpected problem on a balance sheet they thought they'd already closed. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Then Serena said, "You have 30 seconds to tell me why I shouldn't walk out of this hospital room right now. And, I saved your life is not a good enough reason." Her voice was steady, a little hoarse from the airbag dust probably, but steady. Caleb had known in the abstract that this would be complicated. He had not fully anticipated quite how much of the complication would be in that voice, in the fact that she sounded like someone who had been through something and come out the other side with very little patience left for things that wasted her time. "I didn't know it was you," he said. "I want to say that first." "Okay," she said. That's one sentence. 28 seconds. There's no clock, he said. There is in my head, she said. He pulled the visitor's chair over without asking and sat down because he thought standing over a woman in a hospital bed was the wrong power dynamic for a conversation that was already at a disadvantage. He laced his hands together and looked at her and said as plainly as he could manage, "Your car went through the guardrail on the Route 9 overpass. I was behind you. I pulled you out of the water and called 911 and rode to the hospital because you didn't have an emergency contact listed, and I didn't think you should be alone. I didn't know it was you until the nurse said your name." Serena looked at him for a long moment. She had always had the kind of eyes that made you feel like you were being read rather than looked at. He'd noticed that at family dinners years ago. In the peripheral way, you notice things about people you're not supposed to be paying close attention to. Now those eyes were doing something more careful, assessing whether what he'd said cost him anything to say. "You stayed," she said. Not a question. "Yes." "Why?" "Because you didn't have anyone listed," he said again. "And because—" He stopped, started over. "Because I pulled you out of a car, and then your name turned out to be Serena Voss, and I didn't know how to leave after that." She was quiet for a moment. Outside the bay curtain, the ER continued its nighttime rhythm. Shoes on linoleum, a monitor beeping 2 bays over. Someone asking a question in a low, professional voice. Caleb waited. He was good at waiting. It was almost the only thing about himself he was reliably confident in. "I need water," Serena said finally. He got up and got her the cup from the tray table. She took it with her right hand and drank half of it without stopping. Then she set it back down and looked at him with an expression that had shifted, not softer, but less like a door being held shut, and more like a door that was at least considering its options. "I'm going to need surgery on this wrist," she said. "I know, the nurse mentioned." "Tomorrow morning, probably." "Okay." "I don't want Marcus here," she said. There was no emotion in it. No bitterness, no residual hurt. Just information delivered the way you deliver a preference about pain medication or dietary restrictions. Or your mother. "I understand," Caleb said. She looked at him as if she were waiting for him to say something else to qualify it, to push back to say something that revealed an agenda. When he didn't, she looked down at her splinted wrist instead. "My apartment keys are in my bag," she said, "which is probably still in the car. I can have someone retrieve the car tomorrow. The police will have it towed. I have a spare key at work, which doesn't help me tonight." She said this not as a complaint, but as a logistics problem she was solving in real time, out loud, the way some people think. "My neighbor has a key. I can call her." "It's almost midnight." "I know what time it is, Caleb." The use of his name was the first time she'd said it. It landed differently than he expected. Not hostile, just precise. Like she was reminding both of them that they were specific people in a specific situation, not symbols of something larger. He found that he appreciated it. "I'll be here until the surgery," he said, "if that's all right." Serena looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached for the water cup again, and he understood that this was neither agreement nor dismissal. It was simply the end of that particular exchange, and they had both survived it. And whatever came next would be figured out when it arrived. He settled back in the chair. Outside the windows, the rain was still coming down. There was one thing he kept coming back to in the stretches of quiet between the nurse's checks and Serena's careful not sleeping. A memory from 4 years ago that he hadn't thought about in a long time. A Sunday afternoon, late summer, his mother's garden party. Half the neighborhood there, plus a handful of people Marcus had wanted to impress for some deal he was putting together. Caleb had been in town for the weekend and had spent most of the afternoon avoiding the business talk by lurking near the appetizer table. Serena had been there too. Marcus's fiancée, already wearing the ring, already technically family, laughing at something one of Marcus's colleagues had said with the easy warmth of a person who was genuinely good at being in rooms. His mother had been moving through the party with her phone, taking photos. She'd taken a lot of photos that afternoon. She always did at family events. She had albums going back to before Caleb was born, meticulously organized, meticulously labeled. He remembered thinking at the time that it was sweet that she was documenting things the way people document things when they understand that moments don't keep. He remembered crossing paths with Serena near the rose arbor at the far end of the garden, both of them trying to get to the drinks table from the same direction. They'd stood there for a minute, maybe two, talking about nothing in particular. She'd asked him about the Rotterdam project. He'd asked about her firm. It had been the longest real conversation they'd ever had, which was a different kind of strange, because she'd been engaged to his brother for 14 months at that point. He did not remember his mother standing 20 feet away with her phone raised. He had no particular reason to remember it. It had been 2 minutes at a party. He had not thought about it again until now, sitting in this hospital chair turning over Serena's offhand sentence from earlier. Marcus had a reason. He said he had a reason. He just wouldn't tell me what it was. Caleb turned that over in his mind the way you turn over a stone to see what's underneath. And then he put it back down because he was tired and it was late, and he didn't know enough yet to know what he was looking at. He was still thinking about it when Serena, who he'd assumed was asleep, spoke without opening her eyes.
"You always were the quiet one,"
she said. "Is that a complaint?" he asked. "No," she said. "It's just true." He didn't answer. After a while, her breathing evened out into something closer to real sleep, and Caleb watched the rain against the window and let the memory of his mother's phone sit at the edge of his thoughts, like a question he wasn't sure he wanted to ask. The surgery was at 8:15 in the morning, and it lasted just under 2 hours, and Caleb was in the waiting room for all of it, with a cup of coffee he'd stopped drinking 40 minutes in, and a structural drawing he'd pulled up on his laptop that he had not managed to look at once. He had called his business partner Theo at 6 in the morning to say he'd be in by afternoon. Theo had asked, with the mild concern of someone who had known Caleb for 11 years, why he sounded like a person who had spent the night in a chair. Caleb had said it was a long story. Theo had said helpfully that long stories were Caleb's specialty, and that the Whitmore site drawings could wait until Thursday and to get some actual sleep at some point. Caleb had said he would. He had not yet. He did not call Marcus. He was not sure why, exactly, or rather he was not ready to examine why closely enough to act on it. There was a version of this situation where calling Marcus was the obvious thing, the decent thing, the thing a person who wasn't overcomplicating a coincidence would do. But Serena had said with a directness that left no room for reinterpretation that she did not want Marcus here. And there was something underneath that directness that Caleb had been sitting with all night. Not anger, not grief, something harder to name. Like someone who had long ago finished grieving a thing and had now simply closed the file and resented having the drawer opened again. The surgeon came out at 10:22 and told him that the procedure had gone smoothly. 2 places, both set cleanly, 6 to 8 weeks in a cast, and she'd have full function. He said this as if Caleb had the right to receive the information. Caleb said thank you, with a gravity that surprised even him. Serena was awake when he came in, sitting up straighter than anyone should be able to after surgery, with the cast already on her left arm and the butterfly strips still across her temple, and an expression that suggested she'd been composing a list of things she needed to handle in the immediate future, and was waiting for an opportunity to begin. "The wrist is fixable," she said before he could say anything. "I heard." The surgeon came out. She looked at him steadily for a moment. "You stayed the whole time?" "Yes." She absorbed this. Not with warmth exactly, but with a kind of quiet attention that he was starting to recognize as her default mode for processing things she hadn't expected. "You don't have to keep doing that," she said. "I know." "I mean it. You pulled me out of a car. That's the thing you did. You don't owe me anything beyond that." "I'm aware," Caleb said. He sat down in the same chair he'd occupied most of the night and looked at her evenly. "I'm also here, so." She gave him a look that was somewhere between exasperated and, if he was reading it right, faintly relieved, the way a person looks when they've been insisting they don't need help for long enough that they've started to half believe it. And then something makes them realize they were half lying. She didn't push the point. Instead, she said, "I need my phone. It's probably in my bag in the car." The car is being held by the county impound until the accident report clears. I can request they hold your personal items securely. It'll be a day, maybe two. She processed this. I need to call my assistant. I have a client walkthrough on Thursday. I can get you a phone. I have a phone. You have a phone in an impounded car? He said. I can get you a phone in the next 20 minutes. Serena opened her mouth, closed it, and then looked at the ceiling in the particular way of someone choosing not to argue with a reasonable point on principle. Fine, she said. Thank you. He went down to the hospital gift shop, which did not sell phones, and then to the pharmacy 2 blocks over, which sold a prepaid with enough charge to make calls. When he came back, Serena was in the middle of a conversation with a nurse about discharge timing that she was clearly losing on the grounds that the hospital's position was she should stay another night, and her position was that this was unnecessary, and they were both being very polite about the disagreement. He set the phone on her tray table and sat down and waited. The nurse won. Serena was staying until tomorrow morning. She accepted this with the specific manner of someone who had decided that the argument wasn't worth the energy, which was different from the manner of someone who agreed, and the nurse seemed to understand the distinction because she left quickly. I'll need someone to bring me clothes, Serena said when she was gone. Your neighbor with the spare key, Helen. She's 72 and will be upset that I didn't call her immediately and will bring food. Serena said this with a flatness that didn't quite succeed at hiding the fact that this was not an unpleasant prospect. I'll call her. All right. She picked up the prepaid phone with her right hand, turned it over, and then looked at him. You should go, she said. Not unkindly. You've been here all night. You have a life. I'll go in a bit. Caleb. I'll go in a bit, he said again. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she dialed Helen's number, which she apparently had memorized, which said something about the kind of person she was, and turned slightly away to have the conversation. He heard phrases, I'm fine. I know. No, Helen, really, I'm completely fine, in the patient tone of someone managing another person's worry more than expressing their own. When she hung up, there was a silence that felt different from the silences of the night before, less held at arm's length. Not comfortable exactly, but less defended. She's coming at 2, Serena said. Good. Another silence, then, You know this is strange. Yes, Caleb said. You being here. I know. It's not. She paused. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm saying it's strange. Those are different. I understand the difference, he said. She looked at him. He got the sense that she was deciding something, and he'd learned enough in the last several hours to know that when Serena Voss was deciding something, the right move was to hold still and let her decide. Why didn't you ever reach out, she asked, after Marcus ended it? The question was quiet, factual almost, the same tone she'd used for everything else, the wrist, the phone, the neighbor. But it landed heavier because it was the real question, the one that had been sitting under all the logistics since 11:47 last night. Caleb took a breath. I didn't know what to say, he said. That's not an excuse. I know it's not. Marcus said it was over, and my mother didn't talk about it, and I told myself it wasn't my business. It wasn't your business, she said. That's true, but I could have, I don't know, said something, checked in. He paused. I didn't. No, she said, you didn't. She said it without accusation, which almost made it harder. Accusation would have been simpler. I didn't expect you to. I didn't expect anyone from your family to. I just want to know if you knew. Knew what? She looked at him carefully. Why Marcus ended it. Whether there was an actual reason, or whether it was just... She stopped. He said there was a reason. He said he had seen something. He wouldn't tell me what. Caleb stilled. He kept his face neutral through practice rather than ease. What do you mean he'd seen something? He said he had reason to believe I wasn't. She paused, and he could see her choosing the words with deliberate care, not to protect herself, but to be accurate. That I was interested in someone else. He wouldn't say who, he wouldn't show me anything. He just said he had reason to believe it, and that the engagement was over. She looked at the window. I thought maybe someone had told him something untrue, or maybe he'd misread something, or maybe he'd just wanted out and was looking for a justification. I didn't know. I still don't know. Caleb was very quiet. I'm not asking you to adjudicate it, Serena said. It was 4 years ago. I've lived 4 years since then. I've been fine. She said this with a conviction that was real, he thought, not performative. She had been fine. That much was visible. I'm asking because you're sitting in my hospital room, and at some point the history between our families is just going to be in the air regardless, so I'd rather it be said. I didn't know there was a reason given, Caleb said. Marcus told me it was over. He said it wasn't working. That was everything he said. Serena looked at him. That's interesting, she said slowly. Why? Because he told me very clearly that he had a reason. She turned this over for a moment. So either he lied to you or he lied to me. Or both. Caleb did not say what he was thinking. What he was thinking was, or someone lied to him. What he was thinking was a garden party. Late summer, his mother's phone. What he was thinking was something he needed to be more sure about before he said it out loud. I don't know, he said. I'm sorry I don't have a better answer. You don't need to apologize for not knowing things, she said. There was a knock at the doorframe, the nurse from before doing a check. Caleb stood to give the woman room and stayed standing near the window while the brief clinical exchange happened. Outside, the city was doing its mid-morning thing. A delivery truck on the street below, 2 pigeons on the windowsill of the building across the way. The particular flat gray light of a November morning that had run out of rain but hadn't found sun yet. When the nurse left, Serena was quiet for a moment, and then she said, I'm a structural designer now. I have my own firm. Small, 4 people, but ours. She said it like she was handing him a piece of information that had relevance he might not have expected. I know, Caleb said. She looked at him. We crossed paths at a conference, he said, about 1.5 years ago, in San Francisco. You were presenting a panel on adaptive reuse. I was in the audience. A pause. You didn't say hello. You were surrounded by people who wanted to talk to you after, he said. And I thought it would be complicated. Something moved through her expression that was hard to read. Not quite a smile, but a loosening of whatever she usually kept braced. That's the most honest thing you've said. I've been trying to be honest, he said. I know, she said. I can tell. She settled back against the pillows. Not comfortably exactly, because the angle wasn't right and the cast made everything a little awkward, but with the quality of someone who has decided that this moment doesn't require her to be braced for it. You can sit back down if you want. Helen won't be here for 2 hours. He sat. It was, Caleb thought, one of the stranger mornings of his life, and he had had some genuinely strange mornings. He had once spent 6 hours on a construction site in 40-degree rain explaining to a contractor why a load-bearing wall was non-negotiable. He had once driven 3 hours to a family Christmas to find out it had been rescheduled without anyone telling him. He had once miscalculated a budget line by $40,000 and had to call his largest client at 7 in the morning to explain it. None of those had felt like this. This felt like standing at the edge of something whose dimensions he couldn't yet see, and not being able to decide whether to step back or forward. His phone buzzed. He glanced at it. His mother. He let it go to voicemail. The first time in a very long time that he could remember doing that. Serena was looking at the window. He looked at the window too. After a while, she said conversationally, as if they'd been talking about it all along, I don't blame you, for not reaching out. I want to be clear about that. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. I'm telling you anyway. She turned her head toward him slightly, not quite looking at him, but at something in the middle distance between them. You were his brother. Your loyalty was to him. That's correct, and it's fine, and I never held it against you. She paused. I'm only saying it because it seems like you might be holding it against yourself, and that seems unnecessary." Caleb looked at her. He didn't know what he had expected from Serena Voss, if he'd expected anything, but it hadn't been this precise, unsentimental generosity, this ability to look at a thing clearly and describe it without using it as a weapon. "Thank you," he said. "Don't read too much into it," she said. "I'm possibly still on anesthesia." "That's fair," he said. She almost smiled. It was brief, and it didn't stay, but he caught it. His mother called again at 1:15. He let it go to voicemail again. At 1:20, Marcus called. He looked at Marcus's name on the screen for a long moment. Then he answered and stepped into the hallway and said, Hey, Marcus said. "Mom said you're at Millhaven General. What happened? Are you okay?" Caleb leaned against the wall and looked at the ceiling tiles. "I'm fine. There was an accident on Route 9 last night. I helped someone." "What, like a car accident?" "Yeah." A pause. "Are you hurt?" "No, I'm fine." He chose the next words carefully, the way you choose a path across uncertain ground. "The person I helped. I ended up staying, because there was no one else to stay. She's having a procedure." "She?" "Yeah." Another pause longer. "Anyone I know?" Caleb closed his eyes for 1 second. Then he said, "It's Serena." The silence on the other end was the kind that has texture. Not surprise exactly, or not only surprise. Something else running under it. "Serena Voss," Marcus said, not a question. "Yes." More silence. Then, "Is she okay?" "Wrist surgery. She'll be fine. Nothing life-threatening." "Okay." A breath. "Okay. Does she know you're there?" "She's the one who asked me to stay." "Oh." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Caleb." "I know," Caleb said. "It's just complicated. I know it is. There were reasons for what happened. It wasn't—" Marcus stopped. "It wasn't arbitrary." "Okay," Caleb said. "There were reasons," Marcus said again, and something in his voice was doing a thing Caleb couldn't quite identify. Not defensive, not guilty. Something more like a person reading from a text they'd memorized so long ago they'd stopped questioning whether it was accurate. "Okay," Caleb said again, and didn't push because he didn't yet have the ground to stand on, to push. He said goodbye and went back into the room. Serena was on the prepaid phone talking to what sounded like her assistant, running through a week's worth of scheduling adjustments with remarkable efficiency, given that she was doing it one-handed from a hospital bed. He sat down and waited. She managed to sound almost completely fine, which he was beginning to understand was something she had a great deal of practice at. Helen arrived at 2:15, 72 years old as advertised, with a tote bag that smelled of cinnamon rolls and the energy of someone who had been worried since receiving a phone call, and was channeling it into action. She took one look at Caleb and sized him up with the efficiency of someone who had been reading people for 7 decades. "You're the one who pulled her out," Helen said. "Yes," Caleb said. "You stayed all night." "Yes." Helen looked at Serena. "He looks tired," she said, as if Caleb weren't present. "He's been here since 10 last night," Serena said, with the neutrality that might have fooled someone who hadn't been paying attention to her for the last 16 hours. Helen patted Caleb on the arm with a firmness that was entirely unsentimental and somewhat comforting. "Go sleep," she said. "I'll sit with her." Caleb stood. He looked at Serena, who was looking at him with that careful expression, measuring, assessing, deciding. "I'll come by tomorrow morning," he said, "when they discharge you." He expected her to argue. She didn't. She said, "All right," and looked back at Helen. And Caleb took the fact that she hadn't argued as the most significant thing that had happened all day, which was saying something given the day. He went home. He showered. He lay on his bed and looked at the ceiling and thought about a garden party and a phone, and a reason Marcus said he had, and at some point the thinking turned into sleep without his noticing. Caleb brought coffee. He brought it because it seemed like the right gesture for someone being discharged from a hospital, better than flowers, which were impractical, and better than nothing, which was wrong. He stopped at the place on 5th that did the light roast Serena had mentioned once 4 years ago at a family dinner. As an offhand preference, he'd had no particular reason to remember, and had apparently remembered anyway. He bought 2. He stood outside the hospital entrance for a moment, holding both cups, and considering whether bringing the specific coffee she'd once mentioned was the kind of detail that would read as thoughtful, or as something that required more explanation than the moment warranted. He went in. Serena was dressed and ready, sitting on the edge of the bed in her own clothes, a clean sweater and dark jeans that Helen had brought to cast a stark white contrast to the charcoal gray. She had brushed her hair, and the butterfly strips were gone, replaced by a thin line of surgical tape. She looked like herself, he thought. Whatever that meant, given that he didn't entirely know who herself was yet. But she looked like a person who had shaken off the hospital's effort to make her into a patient and had become something else again. She looked at the coffee cups.
Helen told you the coffee thing?
She said. No, Caleb said. You mentioned it once, at Easter dinner, 4 years ago. She looked at him for a moment. That's a strange thing to remember. I remember things, he said, and offered her the cup. She took it. She didn't say anything else about it, which he was starting to understand was how she handled things that had moved her unexpectedly. She absorbed them, closed the panel, moved on. The discharge paperwork took 20 minutes. He drove her home in the kind of silence that had stopped being uncomfortable somewhere around the 2nd day, which itself was strange because they had known each other in only the most peripheral sense for years, and now seemed to have bypassed several of the usual steps. He thought it might be the hospital. Hospitals compressed time in a particular way, stripped away the social scaffolding that normally kept people at the right distance from each other, left you with just the actual dimensions of the person. Serena's apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building on Caldwell Street, in the part of Millhaven that had been warehouse district 15 years ago, and was now the kind of neighborhood that had independent bookstores and good light. Helen had come by the previous afternoon to get the spare key from the building office, so the door was unlocked. Caleb followed Serena in and stopped. The apartment was the kind of space that told you a great deal about the person who lived in it, not because it was showy, but because it was completely unself-conscious. Clean lines, high ceilings, the original concrete floors left bare, and softened only by a large rug in layered grays. The furniture was minimal, but chosen with the specific care of someone who understood proportion. A sofa that was exactly the right size for the room. A dining table with 4 chairs that left just enough space on all sides. The walls held almost nothing. One large architectural drawing in a simple frame near the kitchen, the kind you recognized as significant if you knew what you were looking at. Structural elevation. Probably her own work. No photographs. No decorative items that seemed to have been placed rather than earned. It was, Caleb thought, the apartment of someone who had decided very deliberately what mattered, and had declined to apologize for leaving everything else out. You can set the bags down anywhere, Serena said, and he realized he was still standing near the door, holding the small overnight bag Helen had packed. He set it down near the couch. Nice space, he said. Thank you. She moved to the kitchen with the ease of someone in a familiar room, and then stopped because the cast was going to make certain things harder, and she was doing the real-time calculation of which things. I was going to offer you coffee, she said, but I'm not sure I can make it one-handed. I can make it, he said. She stepped back. He found the coffee in the cabinet over the machine, the same roast he'd brought from the hospital, which made him quietly glad he'd made the right call, and made it without asking where things were, because most kitchens were the same in the ways that mattered. They sat at the table with their cups. Through the window, the November light came in sideways and landed on the concrete floor and made everything look cleaner than it was. I have a client walk-through Thursday, Serena said. I'll be back in the office by Wednesday. Your wrist? I can still walk a site. I can't draw by hand for a few weeks, but I have an assistant who can do the markup. She said this with the matter-of-fact tone of someone who had already solved the problem and was only reporting the solution.
I may need help with certain things at home in the short term. Getting dressed with a cast is a project. Helen has offered.
Helen seems capable of most things, Caleb said.
Helen is capable of everything,
Serena said with a warmth that was uncomplicated and real. She used to be an operating room nurse. She taught me to do stitches once on a banana. I was very good at it. Caleb looked at her.
You are the strangest person I've met in several years,
he said. She looked back at him. Good strange or bad strange? I'm working it out, he said. The corner of her mouth moved. He was starting to catalog her almost smiles, the brief ones that arrived and left before they'd properly decided to stay. He thought they were the most honest thing about her. They sat there for a while. The coffee got half drunk. Outside, a delivery truck backed up to the building across the street with a series of beeps that punctuated the silence at irregular intervals. Then Serena said, without particular setup, I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer it honestly, even if you think the honest answer is going to make things awkward. All right, Caleb said.
Did you know at any point before or after the engagement ended that there was a specific piece of evidence, something your family had or produced that was used to justify ending things?
Caleb set his cup down. He kept his voice level. No. What made you think to ask that now? Because you went quiet yesterday when I told you Marcus said he'd seen something, she said. Not uncomfortable quiet. Thinking quiet. I know the difference. He looked at her. She was right that he'd gone quiet. And she was right that she'd read it correctly. And the fact that she'd read it correctly from a hospital bed less than 24 hours out of surgery said something about how careful he was going to need to be in this conversation.
I went quiet because I was trying to remember something, he said, which was true.
Remember what? A party, he said. My mother's garden party, the summer before your engagement ended. I've been trying to remember who else was there and whether there were photos taken. Serena went very still. Not the stillness of someone shutting down. The stillness of someone who has just heard a piece of information that is rearranging the room. Why would photos matter, she said slowly, unless they showed something specific? I don't know yet, he said. I want to be honest with you about that. I don't know yet. I'm working from a feeling, not a fact. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, There were photos at that party. I know because Marcus mentioned them after he said your mother had sent him some, and then 3 days later, he called and ended the engagement. She paused. I didn't connect those two things at the time. I suppose I wasn't looking for them to connect. The apartment was very quiet. Caleb was looking at the concrete floor, at the line of light from the window crossing it, thinking about a woman with a phone moving through a party, thinking about angles and frames, and the gap between what a photograph shows and what it contains. I manage the legal documents for my family's company, he said. I have access to some shared files, old correspondence, things that have been archived. I've never gone through them, but I could. He looked up. Serena was looking at him with an expression he couldn't entirely read. It was complex, multi-layered, the kind of expression you'd expect from someone who has learned to be careful about what they let themselves want.
Why would you do that?
She said. Because if there's something in there, Caleb said, then someone used me without my knowledge to hurt you, and I would like to know if that's true. She absorbed this. He watched her think about it. Not the obvious part, the part about the family, the photos, the reason, but the more complicated part. The part about what it would mean to let him look. To be the kind of person who let someone from that family go digging on her behalf. To take the risk that he'd find nothing. Or worse, that he'd find something and bring it to her. And then they'd both have to live in what it meant. Caleb, she said. Yeah. If you find something, if there's actually something to find, what are you going to do with it? He thought about that. He thought about it seriously, the way it deserved. Tell you, he said. Tell Marcus, and then decide together what to do next. I'm not interested in burning anything down.
I'm interested in knowing what's true.
Serena looked at him for a long time. The delivery truck outside finished its work and pulled away. The apartment settled back into its specific quiet. "Okay," she said. "Then look." His phone buzzed on the table. They both looked at it as mother's name. The third call in 2 days, which was unusual. His mother was not a person who called without a purpose, and she was not a person who called 3 times without a response before sending a message instead. He rejected the call. He put the phone face down on the table. Serena watched him do it. "She's called before," she said, not a question. "Twice yesterday," he said. "She knows I'm here." "Probably," he said. "One of the nurses may have, or Marcus may have mentioned it." Serena nodded slowly. She turned her coffee cup in her right hand, a small, rhythmic motion, thinking. "She was always very kind to me," she said at last. "Your mother? At every dinner, every family event?" She was warm and inclusive, and she remembered things I'd mentioned, preferences, things about my work, my friends. I liked her. "I know you did," Caleb said quietly. "I think that's the part I've had the hardest time with," Serena said. "Not the engagement ending, not even the way Marcus did it without a real explanation, but the fact that I had been in your family's house for over a year and I thought I knew the room, and then it became clear I had been very wrong about what was in it." Caleb didn't answer because there was no answer that would help. "That's all I'm going to say about it," she said. "I just wanted to say it once, to someone from that family." "I heard you," he said. She nodded. She looked at her coffee. Then she said, with a different tone, lighter, deliberate, a gear shift. "Tell me about the Rotterdam project. You mentioned it once. A bridge." He blinked at the change of subject. Then he followed her lead because she'd told him what she needed, and now she was done with it and wanted something else. And the respectful thing was to give her the something else. "It wasn't my project," he said. "I consulted on the tensile system. It's a pedestrian cable-stay bridge over a canal. Very elegant problem, actually. The constraint was that the pylons couldn't exceed a certain height for the sight line, so you have to get more work out of less height." "How did you solve it?" "Fan array instead of harp," he said. "More cables at shorter spans. Distributes the load differently." "Did it work?" "Won a regional award," which is the profession's way of saying yes. She looked at him. "You're modest about that in a specific way," she said. "Like you know you're not supposed to be too pleased about it, but you're pleased about it." "That's accurate," he said. She almost smiled again. It stayed a little longer this time. They talked for another hour. Architecture, his work, hers, the city, the particular challenges of adaptive reuse projects in buildings that had never anticipated being repurposed. It was the easiest conversation he'd had in a long time, which surprised him, and then stopped surprising him because she was the kind of person who made it easy to be precise about things, who asked the right next question, who didn't smooth over the interesting complications. He stayed longer than he'd planned. When he stood to go, Serena walked him to the door, which he did not need to do but chose to. "Thank you," she said at the door. "For all of it." "You don't have to." "I'm not saying it because I have to," she said. "I'm saying it because I mean it." She looked at him directly. "These were strange days, Caleb." "Yes," he said. "But not bad strange," she said. "I've decided." He looked at her. He thought about the almost smiles and the way she'd known the difference between thinking quiet and uncomfortable quiet, and the apartment with one drawing on the wall and no photographs. He thought about the garden party and his mother's phone and the question he was going to have to ask of a folder of archived files he'd never thought to open before tonight. "I'll be in touch," he said. "I know," she said. He went down the stairs. In the car, he sat for a moment before turning the key, and then he picked up his phone and navigated to the shared legal archive he maintained for the family company, the one full of old contracts and correspondence and business records and things that had been scanned and filed and never looked at again. He typed in the search bar, "The year of the garden party," and then he sat there looking at the results with the feeling of a person who has just picked up a stone expecting to find dirt underneath. and is starting to understand that the ground goes deeper than they thought.
He would look tonight. He would look carefully. And whatever was in there, whatever his mother's emails from that summer contained, he was going to read every word. He found it at 11:47 at night, sitting at his kitchen table with a glass of water he'd stopped drinking an hour ago and the shared archive open on his laptop.
He had been going through it methodically, the way he approached everything that required precision, starting with emails from the month before the engagement ended and working backward.
Most of what he found was administrative invoices, project timelines, correspondence about the family company's residential division, a thread about re-roofing the main house. Normal things. The kinds of things you'd expect to find in the records of a family business that had been carefully maintained. He almost missed it. It was filed under a thread labeled Family Correspondence Personal that had been archived in a subfolder 2 layers deeper than the standard business files, which was not where personal correspondence usually ended up. He clicked it because it was misplaced and he was thorough. The email chain was between his mother's personal address and an account belonging to someone named Diana Colwell, a name Caleb recognized after a moment as one of his mother's close friends from her charity board, a woman who had been at the garden party. The thread began 6 weeks before Marcus ended the engagement. The first 3 emails were general arrangements for a luncheon, something about a fundraiser deadline. He read through them quickly. Then the 4th email stopped him. His mother had written, "I've been thinking about the situation with M and S. I have something I want to send you before I move forward. Tell me honestly what you think." The attachment was a JPEG. Caleb opened it. It was a photograph of himself and Serena. He recognized it immediately, the rose arbor at the end of his mother's garden, the late afternoon light, the drinks table visible to the left. He remembered exactly when it had been taken. The 2 minutes near the arbor when they'd crossed paths getting to the table, when they'd talked about the Rotterdam project and her firm. 2 minutes. A completely unremarkable 2 minutes. In the photograph, they were standing closer together than he'd remembered, but he understood immediately why. The image had been cropped. The original frame must have included the drinks table on the left and the space on the right where other guests were visible. The crop removed that context and left only the 2 of them at an angle that put their faces close to each other, with an expression on Serena's face that was mid-laugh, and an expression on his that he recognized as the expression he wore when he was paying genuine attention to what someone was saying. Normal. Completely normal. And in the cropped version, with the context stripped away, with the lighting and the angle and the intimacy of a 2-shot rather than a party photograph suggesting something else entirely. He sat very still for a moment. Diana Colwell had written back, "Eleanor, this could mean a lot of things. You could just talk to M directly." His mother had replied, "I've tried. He doesn't see it. He's in love, and he can't see it. I need him to see it himself, not from me. Send it. Please. You always did this better than I did." Diana had replied, "Are you absolutely sure?" His mother, "I'm sure." There was a gap of 4 days. Then one final email from Diana to his mother, with the subject line changed to "Done." I passed it along with a note about context. "He called me last night. He's devastated. I'm sorry, Eleanor. I hope you're right about this." His mother had not replied. Caleb sat at the kitchen table for a long time. He was thinking with the kind of clarity that sometimes comes very late at night when the rest of the brain has gone quiet about everything that email chain contained. His mother had not fabricated the photograph. The photograph was real. The moment was real. He had been standing next to Serena Voss at a garden party, and someone had taken their picture. What she had done was crop it and give it to a friend and ask that friend to pass it to Marcus with context, a word that in this case meant a frame, a story, a way of seeing the image that directed it toward a conclusion his mother had already reached. She had not said, "Serena is having an affair." She had not needed to. She had given Marcus something to see, and let him see it. And Marcus, in love, trusting, believing that his family would not mislead him, had seen it.
and Caleb had provided the moment. He had stood next to a woman at a party for 2 minutes. He had not known, could not have known. But the photograph was there because of where he'd stood and what the camera had found, and what his mother had decided to do with it. He thought about Serena in the hospital room saying,
He said he had reason to believe I wasn't, that I was interested in someone else.
He wouldn't say who. He thought about Marcus on the phone saying, there were reasons, it wasn't arbitrary. He thought about his mother calling 3 times and not leaving a message. He closed the laptop. He opened it again. He took a screenshot of every email in that thread and saved it to his personal drive. He checked the screenshots twice to make sure they were legible. Then he closed the laptop again and sat in the kitchen with the undrunk glass of water and the specific weight of a person who has found what they were looking for and is now required to decide what to do with it. He already knew what he was going to do with it. He'd known since Serena's apartment since the moment he'd said, tell Marcus, decide together. He wasn't the kind of person who went back on the things he said, especially when those things had cost him something to say. He was going to Marcus first. That was non-negotiable. Marcus was his brother and the primary person who had been deceived, and he deserved to know what had actually happened before anyone else moved a piece on this board. He called Marcus at 7 in the morning. Marcus answered on the second ring, which meant he was already up, which meant something about his state of mind Marcus did not voluntarily exist before 8. I need to see you, Caleb said. Today, in person. A pause. Is something wrong? Is Serena? Serena's fine. This is about something else. Can you come to my place? Caleb, what's going on? I'll tell you when you get here, Caleb said. Please come. Marcus came at 9. He came in looking the way he'd looked the past few years, successful, put together, carrying the particular quality of someone who had made peace with a version of themselves they hadn't entirely chosen. He was 37 now, and he looked it, in the way that people of a certain type looked their age as a form of authority. He sat down at Caleb's kitchen table. Caleb had printed the emails. He'd gone back and forth about that, whether printouts were dramatic, whether they were the right format for this. He'd printed them anyway, because he wanted Marcus to be able to hold the thing, to look at it with his hands. He set them on the table and said, "Read these." Marcus looked at him. Then he looked at the papers. He picked them up. He read. Caleb watched his brother's face move through something he could not have named and did not try to name. It was the kind of movement that belonged to the person experiencing it, not to any observer. Marcus read the emails twice. Then he set the papers down on the table and put both hands flat on either side of them like he was steadying himself against the surface. "Diana Colwell," he said at last. "Yes." "She called me," Marcus said slowly. She said she had something she thought I should see. About Serena. She said she didn't want to get involved, but she thought, as a family friend." He stopped. "I never knew it came from Mom." "Diana seemed to think she was doing you a kindness," Caleb said. "She may have believed that. I don't know." Marcus looked at the photograph. He looked at it for a long time. Then he said very quietly, "I ended a 14-month engagement over this." "Yes." I didn't even confront her. He shook his head. "I told myself I was being dignified. I told myself I was giving her a way out. That if she felt that way, she deserved to be free." His voice was flat. Not angry, yet something earlier than anger. "I made a story about it. I told myself I was the one who was releasing her." He looked up at Caleb. "I was a coward." "You were deceived," Caleb said. "Both things can be true." Caleb said nothing. He thought Marcus was right about that. They sat in the kitchen for a long time. The November morning moved past the windows at its usual pace, indifferent to what was happening at the table. "Why was I the one she worried about?" Marcus said. He picked up the first email again. "I've been going over it. What did she think was going to happen? That Serena was going to what, replace her?" "I don't think it was Serena specifically," Caleb said. "I think it was any person you chose over her. Any person you loved enough to put first. Marcus looked at him. She needed to be first, Caleb said. She always needed it. And she thought Serena was going to change that. Serena wouldn't have changed that, Marcus said. She wasn't. She was never in competition with Mom.
That wasn't. She didn't operate that way.
I know, Caleb said. But Mom didn't trust that she knew. Another silence. Marcus set the email down. He looked at the table and then at his hands. I need to call her, he said. Mom? Serena. He looked up. I have to. He stopped. There's no version of this where I don't have to talk to her. I know, Caleb said. But Caleb, he paused. She should hear it from you too. Marcus looked at him. Have you talked to her? Does she know? She knows something happened. She doesn't know the details. Caleb paused. I want to tell her, with the evidence, so she can see it herself. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I should be there. Caleb looked at him. Not for me, Marcus said quickly. I don't mean, he exhaled. She deserves to see that I know. She deserves to know that it's not just you telling her that it's me too, that I'm not trying to send my brother in to do the apologizing. Caleb looked at his brother for a long moment. Okay, he said. I'll call her. He called Serena at 11. She answered on the third ring, and when he said he needed to come over, that there was something she needed to see, he heard her go quiet, in the way he now recognized, not afraid, but calibrating. Okay, she said. Marcus is coming with me, he said. A longer silence. Okay, she said again, and he could not tell what was in it. They drove over separately and arrived within minutes of each other. Serena opened the door before they knocked, which meant she'd been watching from the window, which was the most obvious thing about her that she'd probably never admit. She was standing in the doorway, in the sweater from the day before, the cast stark white, and she looked at Caleb first, and then at Marcus, and her face did the thing where it closed to neutral. And then she stepped back and let them in. Sit down, she said, to no one in particular. They sat. She remained standing, which Caleb understood was about needing to have the mobility to leave the room if she wanted it. Caleb set the printed emails on the coffee table. There's something you need to read, he said. Serena looked at the papers. She did not pick them up immediately. She looked at Marcus. You already know what this is, she said. It was not a question. Yes, Marcus said. Caleb showed me this morning. She looked at Caleb. Then she picked up the papers. Caleb watched her read. He watched her face move the way Marcus's had through something that went deep and fast, and then went still. When she reached the photograph, she held it for a longer moment than the rest. He saw her eyes do the thing they did when she was cataloging, measuring, figuring out what something actually was in comparison to what she'd been told it was. She set the papers down. She put her right hand flat on top of them. I knew it was something, she said. I just didn't know it was something your family did. I'm sorry, Marcus said. The word came out with the weight of something that had been assembled very carefully, quietly, without help. I'm sorry for what I did. For how I did it. He stopped. For believing it. I knew you. I knew who you were. And I believed it anyway, because it was easier than confronting what it would have meant if it wasn't true. Serena looked at him for a long moment. She was holding herself very still, with the specific quality of a person who has been braced against a wall for a long time and is now slowly being permitted to move away from it. I know, she said. I know you did. That's not an excuse, Marcus said. No, she said. It's not. I thought I was the person who loved you, he said quietly. And I turned out to be the person who didn't fight for you. Those are different. Serena looked at the papers on the coffee table. Then she looked at Caleb. You went looking for this, she said. Yes. You didn't have to. I told you I would. She looked at him for a moment longer, then back at Marcus. I'm not going to tell you what you should feel about your mother, she said. That's yours to work out.
but I want you to know that I spent 4 years assuming I had misread your family, that I had seen warmth where there was only strategy. And it's something to find out. I wasn't wrong about all of it." She paused. "I was wrong about the parts that mattered, but I wasn't wrong about everything." "You weren't wrong about anything," Marcus said. "That's generous," she said. "I'll take part of it." Caleb looked at his brother, and then at Serena, and then at the papers on the table between them, and thought, this is the truth, finally occupying the space it should have occupied 4 years ago. It didn't look like he'd expected. It was quieter. It was heavier. It was more honest. His phone buzzed. He looked at it, his mother. He looked at the name on the screen and thought about 3 missed calls and no messages about the word "done" in the subject line of Diana Caldwell's final email, about the way his mother had looked at Serena at every dinner, warmly, inclusively remembering her preferences, about what it took to do all of that and still do this. He put his phone back in his pocket. "She needs to know that we know," he said to the room. Serena looked at him. "Not to punish her," he said, "because she's going to keep acting like it didn't happen until someone tells her directly that it did." Marcus said nothing for a moment. Then, "I'll go with you." "So will I," Serena said. Both of them looked at her. "She should see me in the room," Serena said. "She should have to look at what she did." She said it without heat, without drama, in the same way she said everything as a fact about what was right. Caleb looked at her and felt something shift, something that had nothing to do with the emails or the photograph or the garden party, something that was about the specific quality of this person who could sit with a broken wrist and a 4-year-old wound and still face the correct direction. "All right," he said. "Tomorrow, we go together." They went at 10 in the morning, which was when Eleanor Hargrove could always be found at the house before her charity board calls after her walk, in that particular 90 minutes when she was most herself, reading in the sunroom with good light and a pot of tea. Caleb had not called ahead. He had decided sometime after midnight that calling ahead would give his mother time to arrange herself, and she was very good at arranging herself, and this was not a conversation that needed to happen on arranged ground. Marcus drove. Serena sat in the back. She did not speak much on the drive out to the Hargrove family house, but she wasn't withdrawn. She was the way she was when she was thinking hard about something. Contained, but present. Caleb sat in the passenger seat and watched the streets of Millhaven give way to the wider roads of the residential district, and then to the long driveway of the house he'd grown up in, and he tried to remember the last time coming home had felt uncomplicated. He couldn't remember. Maybe it had never been entirely uncomplicated. Maybe he'd only thought it was because he'd been the one with the right temperament for his mother, the quieter son, the one who didn't push, the one who never asked the questions that made her defensive. Marcus had always asked the questions. Caleb had made a practice of not asking. He was asking now. Eleanor Hargrove was, in fact, in the sunroom. She looked up when they came in. Caleb and Marcus had keys, and they'd come through the side entrance as they always had, and for one fraction of a second, before her expression settled into its usual, graceful welcome, he saw something move across her face. Not guilt, exactly. More like a person who has been waiting for a particular knock and is realizing it has finally come. Then the welcome arrived, smooth and complete. "Marcus," she said, rising. "Caleb, what a—" She saw Serena in the doorway behind them and stopped. Serena stepped into the room without waiting to be invited. She stood with her left arm in the cast held slightly away from her body, not as a display, just as a fact. And she looked at Eleanor Hargrove with the expression of someone who is looking at something clearly and without performance. "Serena," Eleanor said. She did not complete the sentence. "Hello, Eleanor," Serena said. Her voice was even. Eleanor looked from Serena to Caleb to Marcus. She was very composed. She had always been very composed, and Caleb had always found that quality reassuring, and he was only now beginning to understand that composure was not the same as honesty, and could in fact be its opposite. "Sit down, Mom," Caleb said.
I'm perfectly comfortable standing. Please sit down, he said. She sat. She sat the way she did everything, with a kind of deliberate elegance that communicated control even in the act of compliance. She folded her hands in her lap and looked at Caleb. I assume this is about the emails, she said. The directness of it, the simple, unhedging directness of it, landed on all three of them differently. Marcus went still. Serena's expression did not change. Caleb said evenly, Yes. I see. She looked at her hands. How did you find them? The legal archive, Caleb said. The family company files. You gave me access to manage them 3 years ago. I'd forgotten that, she said. I don't think you'd entirely forgotten, Caleb said. She looked at him. You always were the precise one, she said. And he couldn't tell if it was meant as a compliment or a concession. Marcus stepped forward. Mom. His voice was quiet and very flat, the voice of someone who has been holding a great deal and has chosen specifically not to throw it. I need you to explain to me what you were thinking, not what you were afraid of, not what you were trying to protect, what you were actually thinking when you decided to send that photograph. Eleanor looked at her elder son for a long moment. Then she said, I was thinking that she was going to be my daughter-in-law, and that I needed to know whether what I suspected was real. You didn't suspect anything, Marcus said. You manufactured something to suspect. The photograph was real, Eleanor said sharply. The photograph was two people standing at a party, Caleb said. You cropped the context and gave it to Diana to deliver so that it wouldn't come from you. That's not finding evidence. That's creating an impression and hiding your fingerprints. His mother looked at him with an expression that was close to the one she wore when he'd made a particularly good argument as a teenager. Not quite proud, not quite pleased, but acknowledging. I was trying to protect this family, she said. From what? Serena said. Everyone turned to her. She had been quiet through the exchange, not receding, just holding her place, waiting for the right moment. Now she spoke with the same evenness she'd used for everything, and it was more effective than anger would have been, because it didn't give Eleanor anything to push against. I need to understand, Serena said, what you were protecting this family from, specifically, because I was in this family, or about to be, for 14 months. I was at every Sunday dinner. I met your friends. I attended your events. I was folded into your life with care and intention. And at the same time, you were building a reason to remove me. So I would like to understand what I did to require that. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. She looked at Serena with an expression that was the most complex thing Caleb had seen on her face in years. Not unkind, actually. Something closer to the real thing without the careful management around it. You didn't do anything, she said at last. Then I need you to say what it was, Serena said. You were going to take him away from us, Eleanor said. She said it simply, without drama. Not deliberately. Not because you're a bad person. I never thought you were a bad person. You've never been anything but good. But Marcus would have chosen you, over and over, every time there was a conflict. And she stopped. I had a life. I had a family I built. And I was watching it realign around someone else. That's what families do, Marcus said. When people get married, the family realigns. That's normal. I know it is, Eleanor said. And she said it in a way that meant, I know it is. And I knew it then, and I chose not to accept it. She did not say that last part. She didn't need to. Eleanor, Serena said, I want to be clear about something. I'm not here to tell you that you're a monster, because I don't think you are. I think you made a decision that was wrong, in a way that damaged several people's lives. And I think on some level you've known that. And I think the fact that you never told Marcus the real reason, the fact that you let him carry a version of events that wasn't true for 4 years, is the part that is genuinely unforgivable. Eleanor flinched. It was slight, but it was real. The photograph, Serena continued, showed two people standing at a party who had known each other for over a year as family. There is not a version of that image in any context that means what you presented it as meaning.
You know that. You knew it when you sent it. And you sent it anyway, because you trusted that Marcus would rather believe the worst than investigate it. And you were right about that. And that's the thing that should stay with both of you.
Marcus made a sound, not quite a word, but something that acknowledged it. Eleanor said nothing. She was looking at Serena with the expression of a person who has been accurately described. "I'm not asking for an apology," Serena said. "An apology is yours to give or not give. I'm telling you that I know what happened, and Marcus knows, and Caleb knows. And whatever you choose to do with that is your decision. But there won't be any more versions of events that aren't true. Not around me." A long silence. Outside the sunroom windows, the November garden was bare, the rose arbor stripped of its summer growth, the stone path damp with morning. Caleb looked at it and thought about what it had looked like in July, in the late afternoon light, with the party moving through it, and his mother's phone raised and two people standing near the arbor talking about bridge construction for 2 minutes. "What do you want from me?" Eleanor said, finally. She was not asking in a combative sense. She genuinely sounded like a person asking a question they didn't know the answer to.
"I want you to tell Marcus to his face, with both of us in the room, that the reason you gave him the story you built was not true," Serena said. "That's what I want." Another silence. Caleb looked at his mother. Eleanor Hargrove sat very straight, with her hands folded in her lap, and her composure was still present, but it was different now. Not a wall, just the shape of her, the way she actually was inside. All the management. "Marcus," she said. She looked at her son. "What I gave Diana to pass to you, it was not evidence of what I implied it was. I cropped a photograph to appear to show something it didn't show. I was afraid of losing you, and I handled that fear in a way that hurt people I had no right to hurt." The room was very still. Marcus didn't say anything for a moment. His face was the face of a person trying to recalibrate a long time's worth of settled understanding in real time, and finding that it didn't happen quickly just because you knew it needed to. "Thank you," he said at last. It was minimal, and it was loaded, and it was enough for now. Caleb said to his mother, "There are going to need to be conversations about the company, about what this means for how we function. Not today, but they have to happen." Eleanor nodded. She looked as though she'd aged 10 minutes in the last 15. "Not today," Caleb said again, and it was both an acknowledgement and a decision. They left. All three of them walked down the front path to Marcus's car in the thin morning light, and none of them spoke until they were clear of the gate, and then Marcus stopped walking and put his hand over his face for a moment, and then took it away. "I need a minute," he said. "Take a minute," Caleb said. Marcus walked a short distance down the empty road, not going anywhere, just needing the movement. Caleb stood by the car. Serena stood next to him, close enough that their arms nearly touched, looking down the road after Marcus. "He'll be all right," she said quietly. "I know," Caleb said. "He's tougher than he looks. He looks pretty tough. He's tougher than that." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "She wasn't wrong that he loved you all. She was just wrong about what that meant for the rest of us." Caleb looked at her. The morning light was doing something specific to her face, bringing out the tiredness and the steadiness in equal measure, and making it clear that those two things in her were not in conflict. "Serena," he said. "Don't apologize again," she said. "You've apologized. It's been received." "I wasn't going to apologize," he said. She looked at him. "What were you going to say?" He paused. "I don't know yet," he said. "I'll know when I say it." She almost laughed. It came out very quietly, barely there, but it was real. "That's a terrible answer," she said. "It's an honest one," he said. Down the road, Marcus turned around and walked back toward them. He looked better, still rearranged, but better. The walking had helped, the way walking always helped with things that needed processing and wouldn't wait for you to sit still. "Come on," Marcus said when he reached them. "I'll drive you both home." He dropped Serena off first.
She got out of the car and paused with the door half open and said to both of them with a directness that had nothing theatrical in it,
"I'm glad this happened. I don't mean the accident. I mean this." She closed the door. They watched her go in. Marcus drove in silence for a few minutes. Then he said, "She's remarkable."
"I know," Caleb said. "Are you?" Marcus paused. "You're in some kind of trouble with her, aren't you?" Caleb looked out the window. "It's not trouble," he said. "That's not a denial." "No," Caleb said. "It's not." Marcus didn't say anything else about it. He drove. The city moved past the windows, doing its ordinary mid-morning things. That evening, Caleb knocked on Serena's door with no particular reason. She answered in a sweatshirt with the name of an architecture firm printed on it, a mug in her right hand, and an expression that suggested she had been thinking about something and was not displeased to be interrupted. "You don't have a reason to be here," she said. "Not a practical one," he said. She stepped back from the door. He came in and sat on the couch, the same spot he'd sat the first time, and she sat on the opposite end with her legs tucked up and her mug and the cast still white against the dark of the sweatshirt. The apartment had the particular quality of a space at the end of a long day, the lights low, the city sounds muffled, the silence the kind that had been lived in. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Strange," she said. "In the way you feel after something very large has moved, and you're waiting to find out where it lands?" "That makes sense." "I keep thinking about your mother," she said. "Not with anger. I'm past anger. I keep thinking about what it must be like to live inside that logic, to genuinely believe you're protecting people while you're hurting them, to never have the gap between those two things be visible to you." "It's not uncommon," Caleb said. "No," she said. "That's the part that's genuinely frightening." He looked at her. She was looking at the window at the city lights beyond the glass, and her face had the quality he'd first seen in the hospital, the quality of a person taking honest inventory of where they are. He'd been watching that quality all week, and he still couldn't decide if it moved him so much because it was rare or because it was exactly the thing he'd never had a word for in himself. "I'm going to go back on Thursday," she said, "to work. I've been drafting project notes in my head all week. I have a residential commission that's been waiting." "Good," he said. "And I'm going to be fine," she said. It was the same sentence she'd used in the hospital, but it came out differently, not as reassurance, as information. The difference was that she wasn't managing him now. She was just talking to him. "I know you are," he said. She looked at him then, really looked at him with the full weight of whatever she'd been thinking about all evening. And he held the look, because he'd learned that holding was what the moment required. "You have a peculiar way of showing up for people," she said. "How do you mean?" "I mean you don't announce it," she said. "You don't make it a statement or a gesture. You just appear, and then you're there." She paused. "That first night in the hospital, I kept waiting for you to want something from it, to be the one who'd saved someone, to need it to be a story. But you just sat there in the chair like you were waiting for a bus." "I was tired," he said. "That's not the point," she said. "What's the point?" She looked at him. "The point is that you didn't need anything from me," she said. "You were just there." "I was just there," he agreed. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "That's very disarming for someone with walls up." "I know," he said. "I noticed." She looked at him for a moment with an expression that was neither of her categories, not the managing, not the almost smiling. Something unguarded, something that had been behind the wall and had stepped forward without announcing itself. "What did you want to say?" she asked. "Earlier, outside your mother's house. You said you'd know when you said it." He looked at her. He thought about drainage ditches and hospital chairs, and the wrong colored coffee that turned out to be the right one, and emails filed 2 levels deep in a folder no one had opened. He thought about a woman who had spent 4 years being precisely fine, and who was, he suspected, something rather more than fine underneath it. "I want to see you next week," he said. "Not as a follow-up, not because you still need help. Just because I want to." Serena looked at him for a moment that felt longer than it probably was. "I know a good place for coffee," she said.
"I know," he said. "You mentioned it once."
She laughed then, a real one, full and brief and unguarded, and it was the most human sound he'd heard in a week of significant sounds, and he sat with it for a moment before letting the conversation move on to other things, easier things, the kind of things two people talk about on a Tuesday evening when the large things have been said, and the next step is simply to remain in the same room, which is its own kind of beginning. They talked until 10. When he stood to leave, she walked him to the door again, and at the door she paused with her hand on the frame and said, "Thank you for going into that ditch." "You'd have been fine," he said. "Eventually." "I'd have been very wet," she said. "Very wet," he agreed. She looked at him. The almost smile arrived, and this time it stayed. Not small, not brief. The real version. The one that had been working up to this for several days. He went down the stairs. On the sidewalk, he stopped for a moment in the cold November air and looked up at the lit window of her apartment. Then he started walking toward his car. 3 days later, he called his mother. He did not go to the house. It was too early for that, and probably too early for some time. He called instead, and she answered on the first ring, which told him she had been waiting. "I need to tell you some things," he said. "I know," she said. "You're going to have to make some changes," he said, "to how you operate, to what you believe you're entitled to decide for other people. That's not negotiable." His mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I know." "The company documents are going to have to be reviewed," he said. "I've already talked to Marcus. We're bringing in a third party, not because we think there's more we don't know if there is or isn't, but because we're not going to simply trust that we know going forward." "That's reasonable," his mother said, and she said it with the voice of a person who is trying specifically to say the thing they mean, rather than the thing that sounds right. "We're going to figure out what comes next," Caleb said. "For the family, for the company, but it's going to happen on different terms than before." Another silence. Then, very quietly, "Is she all right, Serena?" He thought about this. "Yes," he said. "She's very all right." "I'm glad," his mother said. And he believed her. He hung up and sat with the phone in his hand for a moment. The family was going to be different now. Not broken, not destroyed, but different. The architecture of it was going to have to be redesigned around truths that had always been there, but had been papered over. That was, he thought, not unlike what Serena did for a living. Taking a structure that was hiding itself behind what it looked like and figuring out what it actually was and deciding what to do with what you found. He texted Serena. "Coffee. Thursday." She replied in 4 minutes. "Yes, you're buying. You know the place." He put his phone away and went back to work and thought about how strange it was that pulling someone out of a ditch in the rain on a Tuesday night could rearrange the whole load-bearing structure of a life you thought you'd already figured out, and how that was not, on reflection, a bad thing at all.